Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, did you know that nearly 500,000 Indian women and girls went missing just last year? We're going to look at a silent emergency, the staggering institutionalised crisis of India's missing and exploited women. Then we'll shift across the United States and we'll track the fierce regulatory and financial battle facing the Sikh trucking community in California. We'll have an update of what's going on over there, including vital roadside safety defences issued by the Sikh coalition. We'll also look back at the enduring, fearless legacy of Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa, the Shaheed wife of Beyant Singh. And in California, we'll explore the SGPC's major new global expansion plans into Yuba City. And indeed, in today's packed show, if we do have time at the end, we'll try and squeeze in a quick celebration of New Zealand footballer midfielder Sarpreet Singh's and his historic trailblazing debut at the FIFA World Cup. All this and more on today's show, and of course we'll take a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, as I said, a huge amount to get through today. It's a very, very busy show, a lot to get through. And I want to start with this, I have to say, a horrific story. I recorded my podcast with my regular guest, Dr. Graywell, and he touched upon this story, and I couldn't believe it. And I had to research it myself to find out if it was true. And of course it is true. It is absolutely horrific. It is a silent, devastating crisis that's just very quietly tearing apart the fabric of 21st century India. This is something that should not happen in any nation, never mind a 21st century supposedly potential superpower. It is a crisis of institutional apathy, systemic violence, and an unprecedented demographic problem. It's a story that the numbers involved are just absolutely staggering, but more importantly, it's told in the names of hundreds of thousands of young women, daughters, sisters, mothers, who literally vanish every single year into a black hole of state indifference, if nothing else. And when we talk about human rights, we do obviously talk about human rights in India on an all too sadly regular basis. We often look just at the headlines, but the real hard, horrible realities, the horrifying realities, are in what the state chooses not to see, and particularly what it tries to hide and bury. And this, of course, is when people like me come in to try and actually dig beneath the surface, peel back those layers and actually bring out the horrible truths of some of these stories. So I do want to look at first at that raw, undeniable data. And according to official records released by India's National Crime Records Bureau, that's the government's own data collection agency, in a single calendar year, over 375,000 women and more than 90,000 young girls were officially reported missing across India. Now, consider the scale of that. That's nearly 500,000 female citizens just vanishing, disappearing from their homes, schools, workplaces in just 12 months. 500,000. That is the population of a city here in Europe, for example. Just vanishing. And of course, as we always know, the official government data usually just scratches the surface. It doesn't actually display the true figures. The true horror of this lies in what happens also after a report is made, or more accurately, what fails to happen. So every single year, tens of thousands of these open cases are quietly, bureaucratically closed by local law enforcement agencies. They just stamp it with a label of untraced. And that's it. Case closed. Now, it's not a failure of police capability. It's more than that. It's a profound failure of political and institutional will. Human rights organisations on the ground in India have talked about this regularly. They repeatedly exposed a systemic pattern. When a young girl or a woman from a lower income, rural or marginalised community, like the Dalit community particularly, disappears, local police routinely refuse to file the FIR, that's that first information report. And instead of treating these disappearances as potential abductions or criminal matters, local authorities just usually systematically write them off as runaways or family disputes. Well, why would they do that? The answer is pretty cynical, as much as it is cruel. It keeps local crime statistics low. It's all about keeping the numbers down. It's about meeting targets. It protects the reputation of local administrations, but of course at the expense of human lives. And the trouble is, because there's no centralised infrastructure, there's no cross-border coordinated DNA databases, registries, no modernised facial recognition databases, and absolutely no institutional motivation, desire, need, whatever you want to call it, to try and track these missing children and women across state lines. They're effectively erased from the state's conscience. They don't care. Not our problem. So who fills that vacuum, that void left by law enforcement? Of course, highly organised, predatory, criminal gangs, criminal syndicates. And this blind spot, this almost deliberate blind spot by the Indian state about these missing women, it creates this amazingly low risk, high reward playground for sex traffickers. Thousands of these untraced girls, young girls, are swallowed up by these illicit networks. They're transported across state borders and they're pushed into this brutal pipeline of forced labour, severe domestic servitude, cross-border sex trade. And they basically become invisible commodities, tools. They're just something to trade in a system that doesn't care enough to look for them. It's absolutely shocking. But this pattern of disappearances is just one symptom of a much deeper structural rot in India. And I talk about this, sadly, all too regularly, because it is an absolute stain, not just on India itself, but on humanity, that it's allowed to continue. So if we pan back from the yearly missing person reports and look at the bigger scale, the macro demographics of India today, the makeup of the population, we discover a statistical anomaly that is unprecedented in human history. When I say an anomaly, basically I'm saying something doesn't look right. Something really sticks out as being completely unnatural. So decades ago, there was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, somebody called Amartya Sen, and they coined a phrase, missing women. Now, he used it to describe a massive demographic deficit. Basically, millions of women who should be alive today based on natural global birth and survival ratios. If you look at a demographic profile of any nation, it's usually balanced, roughly equal men and women. But women, these missing women who should be alive today, should be in that equal, balanced, symmetrical demographic profile as that same profile, that symmetric profile between men and women, 50% of each, roughly, but designed by nature, that is reflected across every single nation on earth, generally speaking. It is not reflected in India. There is this anomaly. Today, international surveys and the Indian government's own metrics estimate that India is missing 63 million women and girls from its living population. 63 million women and girls who should be in that demographic profile to mirror image the amount of men. No, women are 63 million less than actually they should be. That's equivalent to pretty much the population of the UK. Completely missing from that demographic profile. So how does a society erase 63 million human beings? Well, it happens through a continuous line of systemic neglect that begins before birth and then lasts a complete lifetime. It happens through illegal, sex-selective abortions, widespread female infanticide, that's murdering baby girls, and the calculated deprivation of young girls. It's deliberate. And this landmark Indian government economic survey explicitly laid this reality bare when it identified an entirely separate category of citizens, an estimated 21 million unwanted girls. These are young girls who are alive today, but whose parents explicitly admitted that they kept having children only until they finally secured a male heir. It's a social disease, actually, if you want of a better word. So the data tied to these 21 million girls is absolutely heartbreaking. Statistically, an unwanted girl in India receives less food than her brothers. She receives inferior health care if she becomes ill. She's the first to be pulled out of school to perform domestic chores. This systemic family-level neglect, it's ingrained in Indian society, is now feeding a spike in childhood mortality rates for girls and girls only that flies completely in the face of natural biology. And for those who do survive into adulthood, the environment doesn't become any safer. It actually becomes an absolute gauntlet of endemic violence. Again, a story that I tragically have to keep revisiting over and over again. The sex crime statistics in India are absolutely mind-boggling. They are outrageous. The official tracking numbers, these are the official numbers, show that one rape is reported every 15 minutes in India. Every single quarter of an hour, another woman comes forward to report a rape. And I emphasise that word, report. Because, of course, on the ground, we all know that for every single assault that's logged officially by the police, dozens more happen. And those women are silenced by societal stigma, family honour, politics, the caste system, intimidation by the perpetrators. The frequency of brutal coordinated gang rapes has become an endemic terror for women who try to navigate just normal public and rural spaces in India. As I said, rape is endemic in Indian society. And those figures, one rape reported every 15 minutes, is only the ones that are reported. There are millions of Dalit women every year who are raped, who dare not report their rapes because they are prisoners in the caste system. They think nobody will believe them because they are lower caste. And it gets worse. When I say it's endemic, it's even actually written into Indian law. This is another element that just remains an absolute stain on the 21st century nation of India. Rape is essentially codified into law. An Indian man can rape his wife legally. To this day, Indian law explicitly protects perpetrators of domestic sexual violence. Don't believe me? This is Section 375 in the Indian Penal Code 1860. It is still valid law. That exception 2, it defines what rape is. Rape is, of course, still seen as a crime, except exception 2, sexual intercourse or sexual acts by a man with his own wife. So it is legal in India for a husband to rape his wife. Interestingly, it's still written into the code as long as the wife is over 15 years old. 15 years old. Now, actually, the Supreme Court, this has been changed and overridden by the Supreme Court. It is now, of course, 18 years old. Big deal. But I mean, even still written in Indian law, a husband can legally rape his wife as long as she's over 15 and really proceeded now 18 years old. India is one of the just about the only countries left in the world where it is legal to rape your wife. It is a glaring, archaic loophole that is now leaving millions of married women with absolutely zero legal recourse against sexual assault in their own homes. Basically, in law, becoming second-class citizens under Indian law. So when the state treats women as legal property, the economic sector, of course, follows suit. Why wouldn't it? Look at the agricultural heartlands. A story I reported on about a month or two ago in Maharashtra. In the sugarcane cutting industry, in districts like Bede, we see a modern story of corporate and economic exploitation of women. Because labour contractors refuse to hire women who might lose days of work because of menstruation, their periods, or pregnancy. And because they impose painfully crippling financial penalties if you miss a single day of that back-breaking work in the fields, thousands of young, impoverished women voluntarily undergo hysterectomies. They have their wombs surgically removed in their 20s, in their prime childbearing ages, just to make sure they don't lose a day's pay. It is absolutely disgusting. It is a vivid, stomach-churning example of women being forced to mutilate their own bodies to survive an economic system that views them as nothing more than disposable machinery. It is just there are not enough adjectives to describe how disgusting this situation is in India. India should hang its bloody head in shame that it allows this. It has a space program. Modi bestrides the world stage, shaking the hands of Western leaders who shake his hand back. And yet, I have to report on a story that it just, as I keep saying, stains his nation. He should be absolutely, utterly ashamed of himself. Most Indian men should be ashamed of themselves to allow this to happen. And I'm going to contrast this with the whole concept of Sikhi. And again, why? For example, AI says Sikhi should be the one religion. If we had to choose one religion, which religion should humanity follow? It is Sikhi, because of many reasons, not least because of this. Because in India at the moment, under Hindu-dominated India, a society that allows nearly 500,000 women a year to vanish, young girls labelled unwanted by their own parents, where the law and the corporate world combine together to strip women of their bodily autonomy. Contrast that with how Sikhs and the Sikh community treats its women. When we look at the state of women in India today, we're not looking at a historic inevitability. What we're looking at is a profound, basic betrayal of the egalitarian blueprint laid down centuries ago, right across that very same subcontinent. And of course, the Sikh Empire set the example by which the modern world eventually caught up, but India still hasn't. In the 15th century, the Indian subcontinent was dominated by social, religious, political systems that treated women as spiritually corrupt, socially inferior, fundamentally subordinate to men. And it was in that context, that was actually, I have to say, pretty typical of the world around the 15th century. But the Indian subcontinent was very much a prime example of how women were treated essentially as subordinate to men. And that puts it mildly. But it was in that context that Guru Nanak Dev Ji appeared, delivering a radical, revolutionary message that totally upended the global social order. Guru Nanak didn't just advocate for reform, he explicitly dismantled the entire hierarchy of gender degradation. Centuries ahead of his time, in the sacred verses of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, he actually challenged the ruling elite and the religious orthodoxy of his day with words that echo all the way through to today. And I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, and forgive my pronunciation. But his words were, as written in the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, So kyun manda akiye jit jame rajan. Basically, it translates as, why call her inferior, from whom kings are born? That's a really profound statement. In other words, basically, you cannot treat women who give birth to our kings as inferior. And this wasn't just some sort of passive observation. It was a very aggressive, fierce, theological declaration of absolute equality. And the Sikh gurus recognised that no society could ever achieve spiritual liberation or even political justice if it keeps half its population in chains. This was centuries before even the Western world even thought about human rights, even before here in the UK actually gave women the vote. That only happened in the 20th century. This happened even before the United States was even discovered. This is centuries ahead of its time. The first Sikh guru, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, recognised that women should be treated as equals. And he established a society, therefore, that was radically ahead of its time. It took an enormous amount of courage in that context of where almost most of the world treated women as subordinate. And subsequent gurus then put that theology into action. They actively banned all sorts of historic cultural practices that were prevalent all around that region. Things like sati, that was the awful burning of widows alive. When their husbands died, the widows were thrown on the funeral pyre because widows weren't allowed to continue living if the husband died. The practice of sati. They banned female infanticide. In other words, murdering your baby if it happened to be female. And of course, they strictly prohibited the enforced veiling of women through purdah, which sought to hide women from public life. And instead, they elevated women to positions of absolute leadership, where they deservedly belong. Under the gurus, women were appointed to head manages. That's the administrative and spiritual missionary districts of the early Sikh community. I hope I pronounced that right. They fought on the front line. They stood as generals, like Mai Bago. They actually led armies in military defence of the Panth. They were the original Amazons, for those who might get the Amazon reference. They were co-creators of a sovereign, egalitarian society, where identity was then rooted in dignity. It was symbolised by, of course, eternally, by the renaming of Sikh women Kaur, princess, the sovereign princess, an identity that explicitly, from the gurus themselves, gave women independent standing. It completely recognised women as equals, princesses, free from the ownership of fathers or husbands, from any sort of misogyny. So you see that contrast, and why I'm now talking about the Sikh faith in contrast to what India is. Not was, but is, still is. On one hand, we've got this modern state apparatus in India that permits the erasure of literally millions of its women and girls. It protects domestic abusers. It protects rapist husbands and turns a blind eye to trafficking and economic mutilation of women. But on the other hand, we have the timeless revolutionary blueprint of Sikhi, a blueprint that demands absolute protection, sovereignty and equality of women as just a simple baseline for any civilised society. And of course, by civilised society, that will mean Khalistan. And why we need Khalistan in the subcontinent more than ever. And we know in Khalistan, all women will be treated as equals. And I have no doubt it will form a sanctuary for those millions of women in the rest of India who would like to flee that unbelievably outrageous social disease that is endemic in Indian society today. As I say, it's an absolutely outrageous situation. Let's move on and let's cross across to the United States. Sikh Coalition been on this. Well done to the Sikh Coalition. As always, at the vanguard, at that forefront, that fighting edge, the cutting edge of protecting the Sikh community in the United States. This is, of course, this high-stakes legislative, economic battle that's unfolding in California and right across the states, but it's focused particularly in California. Because, of course, this is about the livelihood of thousands of Sikh families who are that backbone of American logistics and what's called the drayage industry. That is the carrying, the freight of containers from A to B of your everyday goods, the things that fill your shelves in all your shops and supermarkets. And for decades, we know the Sikh community is obviously in the diaspora, particularly in California, in places like California. They've invested a huge amount of sweat, money, whatever, labour into commercial trucking. They keep the wheels of the global supply chain, particularly the American supply chain, moving through all its infrastructure, the transit hubs, the coastal ports, whatever. Now, that economic lifeline is, of course, facing an unprecedented attack from all sorts of directions. Federal regulators, administrative bureaucracy, aggressive state compliance deadlines, you name it. Everybody seems to be having a go at the trucking industry, which of course has such an impact on the Sikh community. And at the epicentre of all this mess is this sweeping directive from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA. Now, the federal government has rolled out a really restrictive final rule targeting commercial driver's licenses, CDLs, across the United States, aggressively blocking non-domiciled CDL applications and tightening the administrative noose on veteran drivers who don't possess permanent residency or citizens' documentation, despite operating safely and legally for years. And basically, in other words, if your right to remain in the United States expires before your CDL, doesn't matter, you're out, that's it, no CDL. So the fallout from this mess, as I describe it, has of course sparked an absolutely massive, ferocious, high-level political war. And it's happened between Washington and Sacramento. Now, California's Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, initially sought to delay this implementation of these awful, draconian federal guidelines to protect its massive Sikh workforce. Not just Sikhs, obviously, there are other truck drivers as well, but basically the state government in California is trying very hard to protect its industry, its citizens' livelihoods. And in retaliation, the federal government back in Washington basically weaponized money, weaponized its leverage over funding California. So the US Department of Transportation aggressively moved to penalise California by withholding $160 million of funding, of federal infrastructure and highway funding for next year. They said, you comply or you're not going to get your $160 million budget next year. In itself is just a pretty nasty move. And it's basically, it's economic insanity. It's not abstract bureaucratic debate. This is no sort of argument between two state business units, for want of a better expression. It is a direct threat to a highly fragile supply chain, a global supply chain. California alone controls about 25% of the entire United States drayage capacity, that is freight capacity. That's shipping containers by truck to the final destination. That is the critical short-haul trucking required to move containerfuls of essential goods from ports to rail yards and distribution centres. So California controls about 25% of the US's freight. And industry analysts are warning, if you enforce these federal restrictions, it will instantly sideline up to 194,000 veteran commercial drivers across California alone. So in reality, it is an immediate and catastrophic reduction of the logistics workforce by up to 25%. And the financial shockwaves of this, and I don't think they've actually thought this through, but the financial shockwaves would be absolutely enormous. It would hit small independent Sikh-owned fleets the hardest, and it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars in driver replacement costs, in inflation, port congestion. The indirect impact of this is absolutely monumental. And again, I don't think they've actually thought this through. and about the potential influence it will have. Now, the reality is, it's a bit of a manufactured crisis. And the political pushback is finally actually gathering a bit of steam. And leading the charge in this, sorry, I jumped ahead there. My mouse has gone maverick. Anyway, sorry. As I say, this this political backlash is now gathering up a bit of strength here. And leading the charge in Washington is a US Senator by the name of Adam Schiff. And he's working alongside a coalition of 21 congressional colleagues, and he's launched a formal demand against the administration. And his coalition is demanding the immediate release of that $160 million budget, fiercely arguing that if you penalise California, if you crush its independent truck driving industry in this ongoing, particularly during an ongoing economic recovery, you're basically going to collapse the supply chain. In other words, wake up, because this silly argument is actually going to have a real world catastrophic impact that is going to affect the whole United States. Now, the politicians argue over infrastructure, budgets, whatever, but the immediate daily crisis is actually happening in the grassroots, and particularly among civil rights organisations. And for individual drivers caught in this mess, in this crossfire of this argument, the pressure from local DMV offices has basically descended into blatant intimidation and even legal chaos. And the Sikh coalition, as I said, they're fighting this. They're very much at the front of this, the legal front of this, fighting back on this. And it is all about an ongoing class action lawsuit, Doe versus Gordon, Doe and Gordon. Now, the litigation directly fights the California DMV's aggressive, sudden attempts to cancel or downgrade non-domiciled CDLs held by drivers whose lawful presence documents carry expiration dates that don't perfectly align with arbitrary state system fields. So again, basically, that's a lot of words to explain. Essentially, we are not going to accept that if your right to remain in the United States expires before your CDL, you cannot cancel that CDL. That is basically what this case is about. So in response to this sort of panic, the Sikh coalition stepped in, executing a massive, rapid response advocacy campaign to protect working drivers. And the coalition issued an emergency multi-language trucker support guide, and you can see it on their website. If you need to look at it, go onto their website. And it sends a clear, uncompromising message to class members across the state: do not downgrade your licence. Now, this guidance warns drivers that local DMV clerks are actively misinterpreting that complex legal landscape, frequently putting immense unlawful pressure on Sikh operators to voluntarily surrender their commercial status for a standard class licence. Don't do it. In other words, the Sikh Coalition's legal team is tracking these incidents, and they're trying to arm drivers with formal verification letters to prove their protected status under the Doe and Gordon litigation. So this case is the critical precedent that was set that is now being used as a defence for Sikh drivers to say, no, you cannot downgrade my licence, you cannot revoke my CDL. Now, the crisis has actually exposed a deeper, more insidious trend actually on the highways, and this is the systemic targeting and profiling of minority drivers during just normal routine law enforcement. They're now being targeted potentially by law enforcement because they are Sikh truckers. And so to combat this, advocacy groups are expanding their toolkit beyond just simple legal filings in courts or the legal team doing stuff like this. So the newly updated guidance includes all sorts of highly specialised practical roadside resources, help, assistance, guidance. And it includes things like targeted English language proficiency training, explicitly designed for commercial vehicle inspections. In other words, it will arm Sikh truck drivers who struggle with English language with the vocabulary and the phraseology, the language skills that they need to get through all the normal regulatory compliance procedures that they have to go through. So basically it means they can't be stopped or failed, whatever, unfairly because their language skills are not good enough. Now, the programme ensures that immigrant drivers can navigate all those aggressive roadside interrogations when they're stopped. They can assert their regulatory compliance, defend themselves against any bad actors out there, what they call them bad faith citations, designed deliberately to try and get them off the road. And it is, this whole thing, it's a powerful example of the diaspora moving from a defensive position to becoming a little bit more proactive about this. And again, it's very much, as I said, spearheaded by the Sikh coalition. It is operational resilience on the front line. And, well, the message from the Californian highways is pretty clear. The Sikh trucking community is not just an economic force. It is a highly organised, legally protected class of society that will not be squeezed out by Washington, federal overreach from Washington, or indeed even just local bureaucratic intimidation. So, as I say, it's Senator Schiff who's taking the political lead on this, and the Sikh coalition obviously doing all the sort of the coordination and the advocacy work. So, I do report on this sort of periodically as things progress, but it does seem like things are moving in the right direction, which is fantastic news. And as I say, it's been a terrible time, I know, for many in the trucking industry over in the US, particularly in California. So, best of luck to you guys and keep the fight going. Right, this story popped up. Again, it was Sikh Coalition, actually, who reminded us, let us not forget, and I do like to periodically remind our audience, and in my case, certainly learn about for the first time, many of these very, very important people in recent Sikh history, modern Sikh history, because again, it's very important that everybody isn't just reminded, but even the younger generation are informed and educated about those who came before us, who essentially paid the ultimate sacrifice for the principles of everything that Sikhi represents, fighting against oppression, etc., etc. Freedom, well, you know the drill. Anyway, but I do want to talk about this lady, Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa, because her example is an absolutely superb example and legacy that she left to today's generation of activists. And even if you're not an activist, you need to know about people like this lady and what they did to try and inspire you to equal things. And as I say, it was the Sikh Coalition who actually posted this up just yesterday, or a couple of days ago, saying why her legacy still matters. And I thought this is definitely worth talking about, just to remind everybody what it's all about, and really to understand why her activism is still so relevant. And it is primarily because they talk about a specific moment that really captured the reality of Punjab during those awful years of the 1980s and 1990s. Now, on July the 8th, 1990, 24-year-old Kulwant Singh, a young Sikh, was stopped by Indian security forces in Mohali. And it's revealed subsequently, Human Rights Watch documentation revealed that he was actually beaten and he was shot dead in broad daylight. Now, immediately, the police then, as they tended to do in those days, began constructing a completely fake narrative. They put a revolver, beside his body to then claim subsequently that he died in an armed encounter, a false encounter. That is, of course, the usual standard Punjab police preferred euphemism for extrajudicial killing. Now, as a large crowd, terrified, sort of gathered around the scene, Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa arrived. Now, she didn't look away. She actively stood with the eyewitnesses, vocally challenging the police on the spot, challenging their story. And at the time, she was a sitting member of Parliament in the Lok Sabha. And her presence brought an immediate wave of public scrutiny, because it was her, not just a crowd of sort of local Sikhs who, of course, are easily ignored. Because an MP stood there and started raising a bit of a fuss, it forced senior officials to the scene. And, of course, that whole blanket of anonymity that the police were counting on ripped away, because the whole thing was suddenly escalated. And that was because Bibi Bimal Kaur turned up and started raising a fuss. And that ended up essentially becoming her life's work. Now, following the 1984 horrors, Blue Star, but of course the genocide, and then of course the subsequent shahidi of her husband, Bibi Singh, Indira Gandhi, her life from that time was completely transformed. And it was a time when Punjab was, of course, locked down in that awful, undemocratic clampdown of president's rule and extrajudicial killings by the hundreds of thousands, arbitrary detentions, tortures that became that sort of daily reality for Sikh families. She then emerged amongst all this as a rare public shield against state terror because of her political advocacy and essentially just by her literal existence. And the state responded, unsurprisingly, to her defiance with heavy persecution. Of course, this is India. What would you expect? You stand up to the Indian state, particularly if you're a Sikh, of course, they will then turn their full guns of utter persecution and oppression on you. So she was wrongfully detained as a political prisoner for 2 years under the NSA, that awful National Security Act, that piece of legislation that is often used, and I think Amritpal Singh is detained under that same legislation, the NSA. It's weaponised lawfare that is used by the Indian state, this authoritarian fascist state. So anybody it doesn't like, it just declares under the NSA, no, we're going to detain you. So under the NSA, they detained Bibi Bimal Kaur for 2 years. And she was held until 1988 for no crime other than delivering speeches on Sikh history. That's all she did. It's a bit like Jaggi, likewise detained indefinitely, arbitrarily, for essentially giving speeches, for highlighting, for talking about the history of the Sikh community and how it was persecuted by the Indian state. Indians think they live in a democracy. Do me a favour. Anyway, of course, the Panth responded with overwhelming democratic legitimacy to what they did in 1989. November 1989, there was an election. And in that election, there was a landslide victory. Bibi was elected to the Indian Parliament for the Ropar constituency, running on, basically, a Khalistan ticket. It was a Sikh self-determination platform that she stood for. And, of course, freedom from authoritarian rule. And when, again, see, it's worth actually highlighting this once again. Amritpal Singh, elected to the Lok Sabha. There was another, the nephew, was it the son of Beant Singh, elected to the Lok Sabha in the elections 2 years ago on pro-Khalistan tickets. This is back in 1989. She, Bibi Bimal Kaur Khalsa, elected on the same pro-Khalistan ticket. So when you hear Hindus, Hindutva, the Indian state, the Indian government saying the Khalistan movement is just some fringe, it's a fringe movement. It is not a fringe movement. It has been there essentially since the Sikh Empire. And it has never gone away. It is still there, ingrained in the spirit, the hearts and minds of just about every Sikh in the Punjab. It is there, as demonstrated, because every time there is an election, pro-Khalistan candidates get elected with unprecedented majorities. Case in point. Anyway, but once she was elected, she used her parliamentary seat not to assimilate and integrate and toe the line, but she amplified deliberately the voices of devastated families back in the Punjab. And she famously described a Punjab where young men were taken away at will, tortured to death, and parents were then forced to beg the police just to know if their sons were even still alive or dead so they could perform last rites. That is what she publicly aired at every opportunity. And she herself passed away under highly disputed and suspicious circumstances on September the 2nd, 1991, leaving 3 young children behind, and of course all the questions about how she died. But the Sikh Coalition, in their reflection here, they said, look, her legacy is clear, it's secured. She belonged to that heroic generation of human rights defenders, alongside many others like her, like Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra, Justice Ajit Singh Bains, many others who we've talked about on an all-too-regular basis, who understood that impunity thrives in silence. In other words, if you don't speak up, you are essentially compliant in that persecution. So this legacy, as I say, well worth remembering. And final one, I need to zip through this. This is just in recent days. This is a major milestone in California. The the SGPC appeared in California. It's part of this coordinated global strategy by the Panth to try and fortify its physical security and, of course, its long-term sovereignty. And the SGPC, the Shiromani Gurdwara Parbandhak Committee, launched a sweeping initiative to really beef up its internal task force, the Seva Dal. Now, according to official directives published by the Tribune in India, and I've actually heard from a very reliable source that the SGPC has now agreed to aggressively recruit Amrit Dari ex-servicemen and retired army personnel aged between 35 and 45 into its ranks, because these veterans, with their advanced professional training, their tactical discipline, their competence, etc., they're now being deployed or will be deployed as an armed, specialised shield to secure historic Sikh shrines against antisocial elements, but also essentially to protect against Biadbi. They will become the guardians of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. I refer back to a recent podcast I did with Dr. Grewal, where he said we must have a force of retired soldiers, retired veterans, to protect our heritage, to protect our Gurdwaras, protect our Guru Granth Sahib Ji against this rising tide of Biadbi and sacrilegious attacks against the centres of the Sikh faith. And here we are. I mean, what great news is this? And so delighted to report that, but also there is in California itself, so that was announced just a day or two ago by the SGPC, this establishment of these veterans. But in alliance with that, also at the same time, in California, days ago, the president, Harjinder Singh Dhami, he visited Yuba City in California. And of course, California is home to one of the largest, most established and most politically conscious Sikh populations outside of India. You see, I've reported on various sort of legal initiatives that they've launched against Hindutva to fight back against the influence of Hindutva. Anyway, President Dhami met with the local community, met with their leadership, to announce that the SGPC is going to move forward with a detailed planning phase to establish its landmark North American Extension Centre, and plan to be on site probably in the coming year. So it's an ambitious project, and it is all to do with a profound legacy by Sardar Didar Singh Bains. And he was celebrated globally as a visionary Sikh leader and a pioneering farmer. And he recognised decades ago that the growth of diaspora needed a permanent infrastructure. It couldn't just rely on, obviously, the central focus back in Punjab. It needed to extend that infrastructure out into the diaspora so it can then build satellites, powerful, strong satellites in regions like California, for example. And to secure the future, he basically put his money where his mouth was. He donated 14 acres of prime Californian land directly to the SGPC. And his vision was a beacon of spiritual and academic guidance that would then stand independent of state interference. So again, talk about a satellite, it's free of anything happening in Punjab and India. In other words, it's safe and secure on Californian soil to grow and expand and preserve spiritual and academic guidance for the Sikh faith. So in Yuba City, the blueprint, it goes actually beyond just a simple traditional complex. The site will house state-of-the-art facilities dedicated to printing, publishing, and of course the distribution globally of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, alongside all sorts of authentic Sikh historical literature. So by establishing a sovereign, localised publishing infrastructure in the States, the diaspora is basically protecting, it's shielding Panthic literature from outside influence. Like I even reported recently how in India, Hindutva is trying to get its claws into Panthic literature, the sacrilege laws, for example, protecting the Guru Granth Sahib Ji in Punjab, refer to that. In other words, they need to get away from the efforts of an aggressive Hindutva agenda to seize control of the texts of Sikhi. Because once they've got control, they can manipulate it, change it, literally change it. So by doing this in California, it is protecting, it's providing a shield against that sort of attack and preserving it. But also, it builds a world-class hub for the preservation of the Punjabi language. And of course, the research, advanced research into academic elements of Sikhi and so on. So this, again, it's a huge, huge step forward. And it's a great step forward. Early days yet, but as I say, every step counts. They're all stepping stones towards a much more powerful, secure future for the Sikh faith and the Sikh community globally. Now, I'm going to zip through this very quickly. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I didn't show you that. That is the report of the new centre in California. Weirdly, it looks like Surinder Singh. When I first saw that photo, that's the president, Harjinder Singh Dhami. It does look like our Surinder, weirdly. That's just me. Do you guys feel the same? If you see Surinder on his channel, I'm sure that's Surinder. Weird. Anyway, very quickly, I'm just going to zip through. Last night, I think it was, Sarpreet Singh made his debut for New Zealand on the global stage. The first Sikh footballer, midfielder apparently. He made his name in the history books. He was actually born in New Zealand to Punjabi parents. He's 27-year-old. He's been selected for the New Zealand football team. And he was there playing and in Los Angeles. And apparently they operated in a dynamic 4-2-3-1 formation, which is absolutely meaningless to me because I don't follow football, I follow rugby. Anyway, but apparently it was in a 4-2-3-1 formation. And apparently he played extremely well. He was constantly attacking. He apparently registered 3 shots on goal. He dictated the tempo for most of the game. And again, I think just made himself proud. And of course, made the Sikh community proud. So well done to Sarpreet. Fantastic news. I don't think New Zealand are much favoured to go very far in this tournament, but it doesn't matter. It's all about playing the game and getting the Sikh name out there, which is fantastic. I think there he is in action. Brilliant stuff. Anyway, right. So I must rush on because we're running out of time. Let's move on to our comments column. Right. A lot of in-depth comments here, so I'm going to have to sort of zip through them quite quickly. Stay safe, one of our regulars. This was almost a philosophical comment. But basically, look, India as it stands, particularly areas like Punjab, Jalandhar, etc. Yeah, they might have big houses, but the infrastructure is so creaking at the seams. It is so basic. The water system is unreliable. The water's dirty. The air's dirty. It's polluted. Basically, the modernisation across India, I mean, yes, you go to the big cities, Mumbai, wherever, they are amazing high-rise cities. You know, they are modern cities in the true sense of the word. But you quickly go outside the cities and you are amongst some of the poorest areas on the planet in terms of its infrastructure, its quality of life, etc. But contrast that, as you do, stay safe, with actually, if Sikhs could repatriate, if the diaspora, once Khalistan's established, once the diaspora, or a large part of it, repatriates back to Khalistan, they are going to bring with it a huge amount of motivation, but more importantly, money, finance, investment. They can actually build a modern Khalistan. They can drag that whole area out of its impoverished state that's been deliberately impoverished by the Indian state to deliberately dissolve it economically. This influx of diaspora Sikhs, and not just Sikhs, you know, it could be all sorts of people. It could be me, you know, who knows? But they will bring with them the money, the investment to build that infrastructure, to drag it out of that mess that is modern day India. Absolutely, totally right. ZFPV, this was a slightly convoluted comment, and I had to sort of read it a few times just trying to understand exactly what you mean. But essentially, if I paraphrase, and I hope I've got it right, ZFPV, basically, well, you start off, if a Western power invaded India, it would settle the whole issue once and for all. Well, I mean, ironically, the British did that, was it how many hundreds of years ago? And it became a very stable, it wasn't perfect, let's be honest, but at least it was a stable society. But ultimately, this isn't about the British Empire. This is about modern colonial India. And it's unrealistic. Nobody's going to invade India. I mean, I hope China doesn't. There's There's a thought. There's a rabbit hole we could maybe discuss one day in the future. I don't think they will. But ultimately, we can't invade India. That's never going to be on the cards. But what we should do and what we can do is break it up. And that is the inevitable, probable trajectory that India's heading in. Watch my podcast this week where we actually discuss this again. We come to the conclusion, spoiler alert, but we basically conclude that India is on a trajectory that something is going to happen to India in the foreseeable future. We don't know what specifically, but it will likely be either a breakup or a complete restructuring because it cannot continue under its current trajectory with this Hindu Rashtra, this Hindutva agenda that is literally driving India apart. And you, ZFPV, actually touched on this yourself because you remind us that India, what we call India, it's made up of an absolute, I was going to say melting pot. It's not a melting pot. They haven't been melted together. It is a collection of disparate, diverse, completely independent cultures. As you say, there's Iranian blood in there. India is a proxy of Iran. There's the Mughals in there. Basically, there's a bit of absolutely everything in there. And trying to homogenize it, to squeeze it into this artificial construct that is called India, that's still a young country, it's just not going to happen. And the more that the RSS, Modi's regime, try and push this and force this on India, the more actually it's breaking apart. So it's absolutely true. I'm with you on that comment. Govinda Saund. This was... again, this highlights the status of your average Sikh in India these days is that they are persecuted from every angle. As you rightly say, if you're a business owner, if you try and be an entrepreneur as a Sikh in modern-day India, everything comes at you from all directions. And the Indian state will do everything it can to incentivize your enemies. It'll shower people with money who are not Sikhs, but when it comes to you being a Sikh, they will target you and they'll do everything they can to close you down, either economically or worse. And of course, when politics enter the equation, they will betray you in a heartbeat. They'll secure your vote, but then they will betray you as soon as it becomes suitable for them to do so. They don't care about you. And as you rightly say, if that doesn't work, the government is clearly prepared to go that step further and use violence against minorities, which it has done on all too many occasions, as we well know. Balbir Kaur. Balbir, hello Balbir. You basically follow the same theme, and it links back to the story I did yesterday. Why is the Sikh regiment struggling to recruit Sikhs, Jat Sikhs specifically, into the regiment to fight for India? Well, as you rightly say, Balbir, why would they? When Indians burden Sikhs with all this stuff we've just been talking about, why would they feel incentivized, motivated to fight for a country that hates them? All that India wants is it wants Punjab, it wants its land, it doesn't want Sikhs. It wants the resources of Punjab. They want its water, they want its agriculture. As you rightly say, India is run by a bunch of crooks, two gangsters. It's a whole group of gangsters, to be perfectly honest. Harjinder Barrage. This is a discussion about Hindutva and RSS. And this really aligns with my own personal experience on social media. I think a few of you have probably seen me popping into all sorts of debates about Khalistan across social media. I just cannot resist it. I know I shouldn't, but I just get drawn in. You know how addictive social media is. I just see these comments from Hindus, Hindutva supporters, not Hindus, Hindutva supporters. These Indians who are so indoctrinated, and I just have to jump in and say, look, that is not true, what you're saying. Can you not see the truth? But Harjinder, you actually, you hit the nail on the head. It doesn't matter what any of us try and persuade them. They are so brainwashed. The Hindu mind is so brainwashed. They are so entrenched in the caste system that they cannot see the prison walls around them. They think, and we've touched on this when I've done some podcasts about the caste system specifically, that pyramid. As long as you have somebody beneath you, you've got something to preserve. You don't want to change the system because you might not be the upper caste, but you've always got somebody below you who you can boss around or feel superior to. So the system maintains itself because at least most people in that pyramid well, actually not most people, a lot of people in that pyramid actually still benefit to some degree from the caste system. Obviously, if you're upper caste, if you're a Brahmin, you're at the top of the tree, you're at the peak. Everybody's inferior to you, but not if you're a Dalit. And ironically, as you rightly said, they're so brainwashed that they think my place in the caste system is a privilege from Brahma. God has placed me in this lower caste because that is what God thinks I should be. And I thank God for that. That is the mindset you're up against. I come across it daily. I bang my head against the wall with these people. You cannot persuade them. And this is the power of indoctrination. Yeah, Harjinder, you're absolutely right with that. ZFPV pops back in with a link. Thank you for this link. I might even do a story next week on this if we can fit it in. It is about the RSS, and the link is to another video talking about the history of the RSS. I've read a fascinating book actually recently. I'm only partway through it because it's very heavy going, but it's written by a professor at Punjab University, a lady. And it is about the history of the RSS. As I say, it's very heavy going. There's a lot of academic stuff in there. But it is absolutely shocking and very eye-opening about the history of the RSS. It is essentially, it's not just a Nazi-inspired organisation, a militant organisation inspired by the whole Nazi philosophy and the superiority of the Hindu race. It also has a whole element of how it treats women inferior. Again, refer to my first story. This is why women are treated so poorly in India, is because this RSS ideology is so infused in Indian society. Anyway, so this link is to a video about why the RSS has been banned in the past and should be required to register, should be required. In fact, all politicians should be required by law to register the fact that they are members of the RSS. And it has become outlawed twice in the past and twice it's been overturned, clearly through lobbying and infiltrated Brahmanical power who control the court, saying, yeah, we'll overturn it. Anyway, final set. Just be a call. Good information and stuff to muffins. Always true and inspiring. Keywords there. Good information, true, inspiring. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for compliments. But I picked up on these, as I often do, because you're absolutely right. I need to be truthful. I need to provide you inspiration. Why? Well, firstly, because of course I need you to know the truth, and all our viewers need to know the truth, not just the nonsense headlines of propaganda that we are swamped with on a daily basis, but because you need to know the truth. And equally as importantly, that you are inspired. Because, as I keep reminding you, keep the faith. We are winning this war. You are not alone. The Khalistan movement is not alone. It is massive. It is growing. It is global. But equally importantly, it is Punjabi based as well. There is a huge support in the Punjab for Khalistan, as evidenced by every election that is held, where any democratic ability to express your opinion proves the Khalistan movement is very much alive and well and growing. So this is the inspiration that I need to try and disseminate, to try and spread across all of you guys, and to trust. I know you guys feel inspired, not just by me, but by all of us together, united. That inspiration is a united feeling of, what's that word? Dharam. It is. It's that word that we covered, I learnt about in a podcast with Dr. Grow. We talked about the Panth and Dharam. What is Dharam? What is the Panth? The Panth only exists because of Dharam. Dharam exists within all of us, inspired by God. And that is the inspiration, really. That is where the inspiration comes from Dharam, that then creates the Panth, that then creates this global feeling of unity, which will manifest itself in Khalistan. And Mr. 403, welcome back. Not seen you for a while, Mr. 403. Nice to see you again. Khalistan Zindabad. Raghveer Singh, Khalistan Zindabad. And Sukhwan Singh. Thank you, Scott. Khalistan Zindabad. That's why we're here, folks. That is the inspiration. That is the goal that is fast marching our way. So, as I keep saying, keep the faith. Now, I have a podcast uploading tomorrow with Dr. Grohl. Do watch that. It's an interesting one, as indeed they always are. And but that is it for Perspectives for this week. God willing, I will see you guys back on Monday for Monday's show. But in the meantime, enjoy the podcast tomorrow and have a great weekend. Catch you guys soon.